All right, everybody, this is in Liberty and Health, and today I'm really looking forward to the show. I got one of my, a familiar guests to the show, for everybody here, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. His documentary that he's put out has gotten a lot of traction. I'm really excited to talk to him all about that and many other things. So, make sure you go hit all the links below, follow Patrick everywhere, follow myself, and check out all the great supplements from TigerFitness.com and get the world's best electrolytes from LMNT and Fox and Sons coffee. I won't keep you guys too long at this point, so let's run the intro and let's go. What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovcik. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health, and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass. Okay? All right.
Pat, what's up, man?
Hey, how's it going, Kyle?
Excellent. You were shooting the shit a little bit before the show. As always, it's good to talk to you and have you back on. You just put out your Oppenheimer documentary, which has been doing really well, and in fact, so well that you were talking to somebody that I know that you've had quite a admiration for, and that's James Corbett. So, I guess let's start with a real quick brief introduction, because I see somebody said that this is a first time listen for them, and kind of take it from where you want.
Yeah, well, I'll start with who I am. Basically, I'm a practicing attorney in Wisconsin, and I've been doing this liberty thing for 7 years now, since 2017, 6 years. And when I started out, I really wanted to be doing long form documentary content like this documentary, because I was listening to a lot of James Corbett when I first kind of came into this world, and so. The Truth About Oppenheimer is part one of a documentary mini series, or a docu-series that I'm doing. And it really started a year and a half ago, before I even knew that the Oppenheimer movie was coming out, but it's about the Manhattan Project. So I just jumped on kind of that interest around Oppenheimer. But a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know before a year and a half ago, that while the Manhattan Project was going on, and most of this happened after the atomic bombs were dropped, the Manhattan Project scientists were injecting American citizens with plutonium. And they did about 18 people that we know of that can be proven by the documentary evidence. And so I made this documentary to see, what's up with that, and to tell people about it.
Nice, man. Well, I'm sorry I missed a part of that. My computer really crashed as you were going on there. I watched the documentary, and I remember you were saying that you were going to start working on it like last year or something like that. Now, was this in response to the film, or was this always kind of something that you wanted to do?
Yeah, well, it was always something that I kind of wanted to do, like this form of content.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Right. Well, you've also done a few other documentaries that seem to do pretty well as well, but like this one seemed to really blow up. And I know I've complimented you before for your work with the Stain of the Century, the Uyghur stuff, and then I think you have one about police brutality, and also Why Johnny Can't Kill. I think I haven't watched that one yet, but I know you and I have talked about it a little bit as well.
I forgot about the police brutality one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I had, this time I have the benefit of a great producer, Mises Pieces, who helps me out and does a lot of the yeoman's work behind this. And so having him, kind of with me to make this content really took it to the next level in this one. And I think that the timing was just right too, with the interest, but more so the fact that it's an incredible fucking story. Like,
Right.
What the fuck, man? I mean, that was my first reaction to learning this kind of stuff. I mean, I thought that the atomic bomb tests were supposed to be, we're the US, we're the good guys,
Right,
saving lives by vaporizing those people. And that's what it's all about. It's about saving lives and protecting the United States. Well, wait a minute. what do you mean these people were injecting Americans with plutonium? Like, and what the fuck even is that, dude? Like, my first experience with plutonium was watching what Back to the Future, right? And like there's that part where I think it's plutonium where Doc Brown, they're talking about what is the thing that powers the flux capacitor, and like we need plutonium, so I got to rip off the Libyans to get this plutonium. But knowing that that is the thing that goes into the atomic bombs, and it's one of the things that goes into the bomb, and we're basically injecting people with that. Like, what's that all about?
Right. Now the one thing that kind of came to mind whenever we were when I was watching the documentary, you brought up the experiments done in Nazi Germany and then Unit 731, which were from what I understand, both done around the same time. I'm sorry about all the technical difficulties. It's very unprofessional, but
No
we're
worries.
making do.
I'm actually
Do you
impressed by
think
your ability to switch from the computer to your phone seamlessly while I'm
well,
monologuing.
you know what? Well, no, you did a great job, because I'd be a little bit nervous just monologuing on and on and on. But I'm glad it seemed at least somewhat professional. But I read up a decent bit on like the experiments done in Unit 731, and it's all I've kind of ran into the question of like, were these experiments perhaps hyped up in like our culture to kind of make us fear Imperial Japan? Do you get what I'm kind of getting at here? Versus like, you don't hear about the stuff they did at Oppenheimer, the Manhattan Project, because this is going to make us look like the bad guys. Which it seems like back in World War II, there really weren't any good guys in this specific kind of situation. But us kind of, without giving people informed consent, injecting them with all this stuff, and then making people as sick as they were, and then them dying as fast as they were. I mean, it's pretty horrific stuff.
Yeah, it is, and I mean, I'm not quite as familiar with the specifics of Unit 731. I mean, I'm completely open to the idea or the possibility that yes, in all manner, that the Nuremberg trial, or excuse me, that the crimes of Nazi Germany in terms of the medical experimentation and the actual same thing going on at 731, I'm very open to the possibility or the probability that what was going on there was more brutal in terms of evil. Um, that I don't think that is necessarily fatal to the kind of point that I'm trying to make. But
Sure.
at the same time, I'm very also open to the possibility that it might be exaggerated in some way, shape, or form. I
Right.
mean, the sacred cow of Americans and the American mythology is that we confronted a unique evil in World War II, and that we were the good guys and we're doing everything that we were supposed to do, and everything that we did was justified. Firebombing Dresden, firebombing, German cities, firebombing, and then nuclear bombing Japan, killing all these civilians and basically waging total war against Germany. And in fact, I mean, too, I shouldn't downgrade what Stalin did and the Russians did at the time too, as they swept through Eastern Europe on their way back. But I just think that it's important for Americans to know, especially in too, because the way that the Manhattan Project hurt American citizens was also unique because it can't be measured. It's not as overt. It's more
Right.
passive,
Mhm.
and where you have maybe a Nazi scientist that's dunking twins in freezing cold water for a long period of time, that has a direct victim and it shocks the
Right.
conscience in a way, but it's not the same as, spreading radiation all across the continental United States and affecting child mortality rates for the next few years. I mean, that is a type of hidden harm, but it's just as horrific.
Right. And this kind of also relates to when we talk about some of the stuff that was done over the last 3 years, where you can't really pinpoint any one thing specifically. And you see a lot of people doing this, but like, kind of to your point, when you think about Nazi Germany, or you think about Unit 731, where they were doing like vivisections on people, where they were, seeing how long they could run with organs out of their body and splaying people alive. That's much more like this is going to affect people immediately, and you could see what's going on right in front of your face. But like you said, if you're exposing people to radiation in controlled amounts, how much can people tolerate? And then, you're going to have your outliers of people who could probably tolerate a lot of it and would never even know. And then you're probably going to have people that are going to be, in the other camp of they get a little bit and then it just completely screws them up for the rest of their lives. So I think this kind of works in the US's benefit because, they can rely on ambiguity in, the overall results of how people kind of fared with it versus, Nazi Germany or Japan, where, it's right in your face, like these people are being harmed right away.
And I do, I mean, of course, as a trial attorney doing criminal law, criminal defense, mens rea, it does matter. I mean, it doesn't in a sense, and this is taken to an account, and mens rea being the state of mind that someone has when they commit a
Right.
crime, the criminal mind
Mhm.
and the criminal intent, and intent being a very big factor of that. But I mean, at the very least, you could have, well, maybe in Unit 731, they were acting with a guilty mens rea, like a depraved mind of
Mhm.
premeditation, all of these states of mind that the criminal law seeks to punish the most. Whereas with the United States, I mean, you, in some small way, it might matter if they were acting with wanton disregard for human life as opposed to
Yeah.
premeditated, intentionally inflicting harm. Although, I mean, in the plutonium injection experiments, some of them did intentionally to create a harm.
Mhm.
And I want to touch too on informed consent specifically, but not right
Sure.
now.
Okay.
So remind me later. But yeah, I think, and so, but when it comes in though, is these people knew they were creating a weapon of mass destruction. They
Mhm.
had to have some kind of understanding of what the legacy of creating that weapon would be,
Mhm.
and they had to have some kind of knowledge or foreseeability that the United States would use the weapon. And I don't know, maybe they didn't know that the US would use it to destroy uh, a metropolitan area with civilians in it. Maybe they thought it would be a demonstration of force. But at the same time, you have Oppenheimer talking about, well, we need to create a weapon of mass destruction. It could be radioactive, radiological weapons, and the intended purpose of this would be to kill hundreds of thousands of people. That's from his letter saying, well, maybe we could use radiation to kill hundreds of thousands of people. So I don't know. It's difficult to determine what their state of mind was when they went through this, but I will say that it's more complicated than just saying Oppenheimer bad, which I hope
Right.
I don't do.
Yeah, well, one thing that I've always admired about you is that, being that you are a lawyer, you are very well reasoned and patient, and also understanding of nuance in situations such as this.
Thank you.
Of course. Well, it also seemed like Oppenheimer was kind of, I don't want to say a quack, but like he had a lot of issues throughout his life, particularly in his college years, as you laid out in the documentary. So, why don't we kind of lay out what his childhood and maybe like into his adult years were like, because when he developed some of these, or when he was doing some of these experiments, he was like our age, right? Because I'm 28 and you're 29, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and kind of lay out what his life was like and kind of how he got to where he was.
Well, I think I remember that he was born in New England and that his parents were both wealthy. His dad was some kind of a business magnate. I think they were in manufacturing, but they were well to do. They probably were new money or something like that as opposed
Mhm.
to old money. But I focused primarily on his years in college because he went to prestigious schools. He went to Harvard. He did that kind of thing, and once he got there, I mean, it's alluded to in the Christopher Nolan film. It's alluded to the fact that he was a bit of a womanizer, which is just kind of funny because he had this sexual fixation growing up where he wanted a girlfriend and a girl companion and was probably sexually frustrated. Maybe he was a virgin. I don't know. And I don't say that as a knock. Like, I completely understand that young men get kind of rambunctious when they, want to be with a woman and can't. So he in his college years, he goes to Cambridge. I don't know if that was his first time being away from his parents or probably his first time being out of the country and for a prolonged period of time. And he kind of had this mental collapse in his first semester at Cambridge in his graduate study, to the point where he was muttering to himself, talking to himself constantly. And at the university in the laboratory, he would go into these convulsions. He would fall to the floor, and he really was in these hysterics. And it kind of culminated with him obtaining cyanide from a university laboratory and poisoning an apple with it and giving it to a supervising professor, which is in the film, to Christopher Nolan's credit. But the fallout from that, I don't know if it's in the film or not, essentially where he is put on academic probation, criminal charges are recommended, but then his wealthy parents fly in, and at least in the film it said that he stopped all of this before he went and grabbed the apple from his professor's desk because he changed his mind. And it sounded like maybe he turned himself in or something like that. So, but the fallout being that he was put on academic probation, he had regular psych evals. There were psychotherapists who diagnosed him with profound schizophrenia. That's a quote: profound schizophrenia that psychoanalysis would not benefit, or psychotherapy wouldn't benefit. And so for the winter term, his parents take him to Paris, where he is they just needed to take him out of that environment. And while he's there, his former classmate from Harvard, Francis Ferguson, who ended up being a famous academic in his own right, visits him, tells Oppenheimer, among their visiting, "Oh, I got this girlfriend." And apparently that throws Oppenheimer into some kind of a rage. And they're in his hotel room in Paris, and Oppenheimer grabs a trunk strap and starts strangling Ferguson from behind with it. And I don't know how long that lasted, what the circumstances were, but he didn't end up killing him. And Ferguson knew that he was pretty messed up at the time and had been there to give him emotional support in the first place. So there was another instance where Oppenheimer had confessed to Ferguson that he saw a couple kissing on the train. And after the male in the couple had left the carriage, Oppenheimer went up and kissed the woman and immediately fell to his knees begging for her forgiveness for doing that. But then after the couple leaves the train, they're going on to a lower station, and apparently Oppenheimer told Ferguson that he grabbed a suitcase and tried to drop it on the woman's head from a raised level. So I would consider that to be attempted murder, or at least attempted grievous bodily harm or something like that. But Kai Bird, the documentarian, doesn't believe that event actually took place. He thought that Oppenheimer just made it up and told Ferguson that, which I don't know, whatever. I don't know I guess attempting murder is probably worse, but it's still pretty weird and kind of fucked up that you would lie about that, just make it up or something. But
right. Now, do you think it would be completely off the reservation for him to lie about something like that? Because by the way it sounds, it seems like he had some kind of pathological personality, that is, as in he had legitimate problems that he needed help.
yeah, I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, he was he was well,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, essentially, I don't think it's beyond the pale for him to have made that up. I mean, if he was a profound schizophrenic, maybe he just imagined the whole thing. I mean, who knows? I mean, he was a genius. I mean, I knock him a bit, but he clearly was a genius.
All right. Yeah. Now, what were his involvements kind of in the Manhunt, or I shouldn't say in the Manhattan Project, but kind of moving forward there, because he was supposed to be suspended from college, but then, like you said, his parents kind of came in and washed that all away. And then what kind of happened from there?
Yeah, so obviously he finished, he graduated, and he must have pulled himself together in some respects, because he graduates and becomes a successful physicist. I think he was a physicist. But he's hired on at Berkeley. And at the time, there was this two brothers named John and Ernest Lawrence, and they invented this machine called the cyclotron. And I'm not any kind of physicist or anything like that, but my rough understanding is that it's a particle accelerator. So they would spin up these particles really, really fast, and they would create radioisotopes from them. Now, don't ask me what that means. It's something to do with, radioactivity. So I don't know if it has to do with the number of electrons that are. I was really bad in chemistry, but if it's the number of electrons that are on a certain element, or with the what that is, the thing, an atom. There's a number of electrons that circle around an atom, and I think that the cyclotron has something to do with shooting them off or accelerating them so fast to create isotopes, which I think is changing the number of electrons on an atom. So he goes there, and at the time, Berkeley, like I said, is this hotbed for cutting edge science having to do with the cyclotron. And there was a great deal of work and to do at the same time about this cutting edge science and trying to unlock biomedical applications for this cyclotron and for radiation in general, just discovering it because it was new. I mean, you've heard about Curie's X-rays and things like that, but also going into this field of creating radioactive materials was brand new. And so you have a lot of people trying to do things that are edgy to push the envelope to make a discovery, but also to get funding and open those doors to get notoriety and funding. So at the same time, you have a lot of scientists at Berkeley who would later end up in the Manhattan Project itself. And so Oppenheimer is one of those people. And I think it was the selection of Oppenheimer, but also what they were doing at Berkeley. But his selection led to him picking a lot of scientists that were from Berkeley because that's where he worked. And so, but I think Oppenheimer himself was selected by Lieutenant General Leslie Groves, who was tasked with creating the Manhattan Project and assembling the team because of his qualities as being this uncanny, having an uncanny ability to inspire people and manage these projects.
Now let's make it a little bit meta, but kind of to that idea, I almost wonder like if it was pure, I don't want to say pure evil, but bad intentions, and like their intentions absolutely were to harm people with the knowledge that is going to like that they want that to happen, or if it's more of like we think we have to do this for the greater good. And if they thought Oppenheimer, like with his pathological personality, if they thought that he would kind of be like a, you know, what do I want to say? Like a means just or ends justifying the means. So like you have this pathological person with somebody who kind of is looking for a way to, you know, bend the rules a little bit for what they may see as the greater good. But they see someone like him and say, well, this is kind of a necessary cog in this wheel to kind of get to the ending, which is, you know, we nuke Nagasaki in Japan.
I think that, of course, it's very hard to tell. And we don't really know because all these people are dead now, and the context clues the context clues are there.
Yeah.
Some of the evidence is there where we can speculate, do some educated speculation. But I think at the time it was very pervasive across the country that people wanted to step in and help. I mean, when even before the draft was instituted, you had young men of all stripes rushing to the recruitment office, and some being so upset when they were denied to serve that they killed themselves. And so to keep in mind that you're in a very different place of patriotism than I think we are now, just in terms of what the zeitgeist was at the time and what the expectations were of national service. So you had a lot of young men who maybe didn't qualify for service for some reason or another, or they thought, well, I'm a lab geek. I'm going to this prestigious university to get an advanced degree. Well, what do people like me need? Or excuse me, what does the country need from people like me? Because I'm worth much more to the war effort as a scientist creating destructive technology than I am as a grunt on the ground with, with an M1 carbine or something like that. So I think that a lot of these young men had ideas for serving the war effort. And I think that they lent their hand or ended up getting an opportunity as a young person to head this project when so many scientists were already taken up with the war effort itself. Um, and one reason why I don't think that Hempel, like specifically that some of these young scientists were bloodthirsty monsters, is because there was an instance where Don Mastic, he was a young scientist tasked with handling the plutonium at Los Alamos.
Mhm.
He broke a vial of plutonium on accident, and at the time, like the world's supply of plutonium could fit like on the head of a pin. So it's these vials are just tiny, tiny little things. So he broke it, and like I don't know, a substantial portion of all of the plutonium in the that existed at the time shot through his mouth. And basically, I mean, he didn't really understand. Maybe he had some kind of understanding of how like dangerous a situation that was for him. So he walks on over to Lewis Hempelman's office, who's the one of the guys who's responsible for injecting the plutonium and starting that program. He's the medical director at the Los Alamos facility. And this Don Mastic comes in and says, I just broke this vial of plutonium and it's all in my mouth now. What do I do? And Hempelman freaks out because he freaks out for several reasons. Like he's afraid of what's going to happen to this guy. He's afraid that, all of the plutonium that took months and months of really expensive work to create is now lost in this person. So I think he called up Leslie Groves at the Pentagon and was panicking. And so, I mean, that gives you some idea of what the culture was at the time and what their ideas or, what their temperament was like. So we're not talking about per se like a blood soaked conscienceless monster here.
Right.
I think it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. And I real quick, Jay Forte, the student invokes the name of Raimondo. I will trust your judgment. Please do and verify with Pat. I don't think you'll be upset at all.
We can
His
talk
work's
about
absolutely fantastic.
we can talk about Justin later, maybe.
Yeah. No, as I said earlier, your work's absolutely fantastic, and it's definitely informed me on a lot of the stuff that I talk about today. But going back to like Unit 731 and kind of like the zeitgeist, I feel like this is something more to the human condition that like people of our stripe tend to discount. That like in Unit 731, a lot of the doctors that were going to do some of these wicked experiments were just kind of kids like fresh out of college. And you have to imagine in the World War II area, I mean, I'm sure, or era, there's probably a lot of like patriotism throughout all the countries throughout the world because you're in a war, so you feel like your side has to win. So whenever you're being told that, hey, you can help the war effort by you're going to go do these experiments to help the war, well, you don't think that it's going to be the Manhattan Project. You don't think it's going to be Unit 731. So you willingly go and sign up, and then whenever you get there, it's probably not like right away that you're doing horrific things, but it's probably just a little bit more than you're comfortable with, and just you keep pushing a little bit more and more and more. Um, that would be kind of how I imagine it, but I think once again you would probably have a better read of that.
Yeah, and I think that there there's a lot to be said about group psychology and group dynamics, and I think when you're in a situation where you're dehumanizing the enemy and where people are around you, there's an authority figure that is telling you to do that thing. And when you're in a place where individuality is discouraged, like the military, you're put into that situation where um, you create excuses, or you get into the group dynamic where you push the envelope a little further and a little further. I mean, there's several psychological experiments that are very famous that have underscored this dynamic and what happens. One of them being the Stanford prison experiment that had to be
Just thinking
called
about that.
off
Mhm.
because there's a great movie about it that everyone should watch. I can't remember what it's called, but if you Google it, I'm sure you'll find the movie. But I mean, some people, for those who aren't familiar, it was an experiment that was ethically questionable that happened at Stanford, where during the summer, a bunch of, I think, graduate or undergraduate students were taken into this experiment. where they created a prison in the psychology department at Stanford. And they took some people, randomly assigned them jobs as either a guard or a prisoner. And very soon after that, you had the prison guards and prisoners basically coming at odds, where the prison guards were starting to basically torture the prisoners, and the prisoners were doing what they could to push back against it. But I think the point of that and the lesson of it is that you can take anyone and put them in that situation, and you will make them, like, the result will be that they commit war, crimes against humanity, essentially.
Yeah, the other experiment that I'm thinking of, I think it was called the Stanley Milgram experiment,
Yeah.
and that was where they had told, where I think it was a majority of participants would actually administer a lethal dose, like a lethal shock, to somebody if they were just told, like, the experiment must go on. There was no compulsion, in they didn't know that they could leave at any time, but there was no punishment. They were just told they couldn't leave. That was it. No
Yeah.
force, no nothing else, and people would administer lethal doses to people of like electric shocks. That was something very, very telling, and it's also kind of reminds me of a book that I talk about a lot, but Ordinary Men, where it kind of details out how average people will go to do heinous things. And the thing I always love about this specific topic is that it's more about, like, you and me than it is about them, right? Because this tells you about your own psychology and what you will do in situations of desperation. It's why I kind of get annoyed when people talk about, like, you see the craziest woke person on Twitter, and, like, what nobody will ever say is that that would be any one of us given the right circumstances. Let's say we don't have food or water, or we felt that a certain cause was so vital to us that we had to, make it known. That would be any single person on the internet given the right circumstances. And I think a lot of people fail to recognize that.
Yeah, and one important thing that dovetails with this about the Milgram experiment is that the subjects were being told to administer the lethal dose by a person of perceived authority. And in that experiment, that person of perceived authority was a doctor, or at least a person wearing a white lab coat. So
You would
I think,
identify them as a doctor or,
right.
like you said, an authority.
Yeah, but I think it, and I think it's especially relevant in the context of these plutonium injection experiments. When you're told by your supervisors, your superiors, that, hey, we're going to start this human experiment where, we're going to send you this, like, the most radioactive element known to humankind to this point, and you're going to inject it in this person, and just to see what happens. I mean, so yeah, it's wild, man. It's The whole thing is just wild, and you wonder how people don't know about this, but also how it happened and what they were thinking.
Yeah, it is kind of insane to think about that. Literally, the U.S. vaporized about 250,000 people at one point. Like, that is no small feat. And the narrative around that, which I like, I'll be the first to admit I'm not a history buff. I'm pretty ignorant of a lot of things historical. I defer to guys like you and, whoever else that knows way more about this stuff whenever it comes to this kind of conversation. But, like, the idea that Japan was going to go take over the world if they didn't stop, but yet they said that they would surrender, but then we ended up nuking them anyways. And one thing that our mutual friend Dave the Camp brought up on his show was they're not airing Oppenheimer over in Japan. Well, gee, I
Yeah.
wonder why.
Yeah. Yeah, so the thing that I point to about the necessity of the bombings was that the United States, after the war, conducted a strategic bombing review. And I think, I don't know if this was done congressionally or if it was a Pentagon review, but through interviewing Japanese officials and interviewing American officials, doing a thorough investigation, they came to the conclusion that if the bombings had never happened, and if no invasion had occurred or even been planned or threatened, Japan still would have surrendered by the fall of 1945. So I think that should put it to bed. I mean, aside from all these people that Scott Horton has compiled, U.S. officials quoting saying that, well, this was not necessary. I think it should put it to bed, and just common sense too. I mean, for Christ's sake, Japan is an island. They had just, they had been at war. They had just, I think, before World War II, they had just fought a war against China in Manchuria, and before that, they had fought a war against Russia. And maybe I hope I'm getting that right, but I mean, they had been, even before they started attacking the United States, I think they were in trouble with fossil fuels and oil to run their military with. So after, fighting the United States for 3 years of brutal warfare, I mean, losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers and manpower and ships, their navy being decimated, I don't think that it would have been necessary to invade the island at all. I mean, it's an island, just blockade it. You can prevent the Russians from invading the island too, if that's the reason why you give. Prevent them from invading it just by circling your ships around it. I mean, it's an island. I don't know what else to say. You could, a more humanitarian way of doing things would just be to block off military supplies, but let them eat. I mean, that's just my thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's really indicative of U.S. foreign policy as a whole that there's never any diplomacy, and especially now under Joe Biden, there's just never any conversation of like, okay, well, how can we de-escalate, or how can there be like a win-win negotiation where it's just escalate, sanction. There's no, like I said, no talks on the table, and we're seeing this a lot now with Russia and China, where we're not really giving them a choice to back out. And it's just constantly ramping up tension slowly but surely. In fact, I think just as well as I do, this past week, I think Biden just banned some investments from American companies going over to China, which it's like, I mean, if you're concerned about them committing economic espionage, which is what we keep being told, um, then why can't these companies just find out for themselves? Like, and we know that if their investments go south, the U.S. is going to bail them out anyways. So what's it matter?
Yeah, and I think that as an example, I might have a treat for your viewers and listeners if you just fill like 3 or 4 seconds of airtime. Is that all right? I'm just going to grab something quick.
No, go ahead. We will go through chats. Don't pull me up, Jay Forte. There you go. Kevin, listen to his AirPod. I don't know if Ben's still here. Ben, I hope you are not getting yelled at. If you go to Pat's channel, he did do I think like 2-hour podcast on Project Bluebeam. So there is quite a bit from Pat in that respect. And I think he also talked to Adam Fitzgerald about that.
We can talk about Project Bluebeam. I just wanted to show your listeners, I have examples, World War II examples of Japanese firearms here. So one of the differences towards the end of the war, they were producing substandard weapons. They're called last ditch rifles. And this is a Type 38 Arisaka, but this is a carbine, and it's example of like the superior craftsmanship like earlier on in the war. So you can see here the nice bolt handle here. It's rounded like this. And here, this is the safety switch, but you can see it's dimpled like that. It has texturing on it.
Yeah.
And the butt plate is steel, or it's made out of metal. And towards the end of the war, you can see the change in the quality of the machining of the bolt.
Oh my.
So they had trimmed it down like that. This is not textured anymore. You can kind of see it there.
Yeah.
There's no texturing on it. This is wooden. I don't even know what the point of having this on was per se, to protect the butt of the rifle.
Right.
You can see that the rear sight here is different. There's no aircraft aviation, nothing like that. It's more rudimentary. And there is no upper handguard on the rifle either. So they are doing everything that they can. And if you see here, this the front band on it was welded.
Oh yeah, that's a shitty weld too. It's funny.
Kind of see
I
it.
had a performance instructor in college, and he always told me that if you needed a grinder for your welds, then you're not a good welder.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you can and kind of you can see that the stock is more rough too.
Yeah.
Um, so I just think it's really interesting. One thing just to see it for yourself, what the actual difference is between the quality.
Yeah. So
So
do you have any do you know how long apart those were from being produced? Like that first one that you showed is actually like really, really nice looking. Like you could tell that someone took pride in what they were doing, as to where that one that you have right now, they kind of were just like, let's get this thing the fuck out of here.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Mm.
No, I think a lot of the last ditch ones I'd have to brief up on that, but I think a lot of them were in 1944 and 1945.
Okay. Gotcha. So, but that kind of puts another nail in the coffin of the idea that they were going to go taking over the world. Because if they're making rifles literally called Last Ditch and
Yeah.
they're completely abandoning quality, then do you really think they have aspirations beyond their own border? Yeah, I mean,
Right.
the
Yeah.
difference is tremendous.
But it's always interesting to see it firsthand like that. I mean, so to believe that I don't know, just the belief that they could have done anything militarily after that, after expending so many lives. And I mean, they were also firebombing the cities too, which I'm against, but
Right.
yeah, anyways, so but I can certainly see if I was a Marine and I had just fought through the Pacific and I had fought on Okinawa and seen kind of the zealous nature of the defense, I would probably feel the same way as most World War II vets do. I mean,
Yeah. Right. Yeah, when you see people probably getting slaughtered like that, it's probably hard to say like, we should just call it off now. Like people probably want revenge. I mean, we see that in like our political discourse at large, but I think it's just largely comes down to people's like tribal nature. It's my team. So, if anything that transgresses against my team, we have to punish whoever did that. And I'm sure that's probably the way that like a lot of people feels that they felt that their brothers and sisters who were fighting, well, brothers mainly, fighting over in Japan needed to be, accounted for, and, justice needed to be served. I think that's kind of the narrative that they probably tell themselves for that.
yeah.
Yeah. So I had Robert Sloan and Joseph Hamilton written down. Oh, look who dropped in. Our mutual friend. Good evening, gentlemen. During the U.S. occupation of Japan, members of Unit 731 and the members of the other units were allowed to go free due to the fact that they received secret funding from the U.S. government. I actually did not know that.
Seems like
That's fascinating.
I need to do another documentary.
Oh, you know what? That would be awesome. I have a book on Unit 731. I haven't read it yet, but it's always been such a fascinating topic to me because, to think of the gruesome experiments that they did, but to also kind of learn from that, like it's kind of like when people tweak about the stuff that, that certain Austrian painter from the 40s may have done World War II. um, uh, we should definitely kind of learn what we can from that because the knowledge is there at this point. Not to say that we should repeat that, but learn everything you can from mistakes of the past.
Yeah, certainly. And it's hard because, history began yesterday and
For most.
yeah. So it makes it difficult to kind of impress that. But moreover, unless it's presented properly, history is boring, and I get that.
Mhm. Yeah, you really got to go out of your way to dig for a lot of this stuff. So, before I read Adam's chat there, Robert Stone and Joseph Hamilton, who were these two? I've watched documentary quite a few times, but for the audience who may not know.
Yeah, so Robert Stone and Joseph Hamilton, they were both medical doctors that were doing research at Berkeley. And early in the 30s, they were inspired by Joseph and Ernest Lawrence. Ernest Lawrence, I forget their names. I mixed their first names, but the Lawrence brothers who invented the cyclotron, and they were ones. They were kind of the ones that were trying the hardest to develop biomedical applications for the cyclotrons and this radioactive technology. And so in the 30s, you have them doing these experiments, and I put that, of human tracer experiments, they were called, because we want to track the dispersal of radiation through the human body and see. There was a lot of hope that radiation might be like a magic bullet where we could direct it to enter the body and go and eliminate certain cells and then leave the body. However, of course, radiation doesn't really work that way. But what they would do is they would have people drink radioactive sodium and they would trace its progress through the human body. So they would create a project where there's a lead-lined box and the doctor would put his hand in the lead-lined box and he would drink radio. They did this, they experimented on people too, like volunteers, even though they really couldn't tell them what the risks of the study were because it wasn't very well known at the time, what the long-term effects would be especially. But they had them drink radioactive sodium and they put the hand in a lead-lined box with a Geiger counter and they counted how long it would take for the Geiger counter to light up and how much it lit up when it did. So there was that experiment that they did, and it was called, in some ways, called a stunt by their colleagues, by some of their colleagues. Later on, Robert Stone would devise an experiment where he took cancer patients from the Visible Tumor Clinic at the University of San Francisco Medical Hospital, and he would irradiate their tumors, which in some ways, I mean, hindsight being what it is, we do know that radiation is the primary modality for treating cancer, right? So I guess it had to start somewhere, but it just seems like there was no discussion of any kind of informed consent or how these people were selected, or if they were made aware of the risks of the procedure, or if they were made aware of the unknown quality of the risks of the procedure. So within 6 months, half of the 68 test subjects died. And we can't say that they were all killed by Robert Stone because, remember, they all had cancer. Some of it was, metastasized or had, big visible tumors on them.
Yeah.
But Stone himself, in his research papers, admitted that, several of the people, maybe 12 or 13, were so ill to begin with that they probably shouldn't have been treated. He also complained about their lodgings, the treatment they were receiving wherever they were situated, which kind of begs the question of like, okay, well, if you knew that they were in a place where they couldn't be taken care of because of the treatment you were about to give to them, why would you put them through this? But other people died too because they swelled up so much that they couldn't eat, and they died because they died of dehydration, or they couldn't, they starved to death. And some of them also developed these like hideous skin conditions and things like that. Somebody likened them to metal plates, to armored plates on their bodies. So, and then after 1943, Robert Stone was involved in another experiment that I didn't talk about in the documentary, where he irradiated more people. And I just read about the details of it yesterday, and they're not entirely clear enough that I, could recount them word for word. But I think it involved irradiating like patients in a nursing home, and so it's just a lot of it is kind of grotesque sounding. And his experimentation was later condemned by the Atomic Energy Commission. So, I mean, take it for what it is. But he ended up being the head of the Met Lab, the Chicago Met Lab, which was part of the Manhattan Project, or working there at least, and being involved in these plutonium injection experiments. So it's and Joseph Hamilton, was also involved with these experiments, and he was known around the Berkeley campus for being someone who was brilliant, but was also like just completely disregarded lab safety and would do all these crazy things for, I don't know if it was for clout or for attention or what was it. Like, he would drink radioactive iodine in front of his classes, and he would run through the cyclotron facility without any protective gear or equipment, and it actually killed him. He died in the 50s, I think, because he was just so flagrant about safety protocols. So those are those two guys.
He'd kind of be the dude at probably my shop that would get his hand crushed by a rotor or something like that.
Yeah,
I think
right.
we all do stupid stuff, but sometimes you got to figure out when not to be a completely total idiot. So you wanted to touch on informed consent. Do you want to hit on that now?
Yeah, so informed consent is actually might not have been the standard at the time, the legal standard. In fact, it wasn't, in terms of like the banner case on this is called Canterbury versus Spence. And so it's a case that really kind of defined what a patient needs to know before they can consent to a surgery or some procedure, operation, or experiment.
Mhm.
I think that just because, I mean, it does affect how we judge their actions at the time in terms of speaking legally. I don't think that it changes the fact that what they did was wrong, because they were doctors and the Hippocratic oath is to do no harm. So I do think that I know for a fact that there was some approbation about the Nuremberg trials and exactly what they were charging these Nazi doctors with doing.
Mhm.
So I think it was, I'd like to spend a little bit of time in part 2 talking about what informed consent is and why it's important. But it's important to understand that informed consent is kind of a shifting, fluid thing. So it depends on how you define informed consent. Is informed consent used to be, at least in Wisconsin, it used to be, what would a reasonable patient expect to be told about a procedure before they consent to it? But then you get the legislature involved, and then they say, okay, well, that's not going to be the standard anymore. Now the standard is what would a reasonable doctor think that it was important to tell a patient before a procedure? And those are two very different things.
Mhm.
So I guess it's not even as simple as in for the purposes of making a documentary. I mean, you want to make something that's entertaining and informative, and you don't exactly have a lot of time to go into this type of nuance. So you
Right.
just say, well, they didn't have informed consent, right? And
Mhm.
that's true.
Right.
And maybe I'll add in some more of the context later.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that is really interesting because, like, when you go to a restaurant, it's not even necessarily like you have informed consent, but I mean, like, you assume it's kind of on good faith that the person who's preparing your food is going to prepare it in a safe manner, right? And overwhelmingly that's the case, right?
Right.
But there still is the off chance that you maybe get something that's prepared wrong and then you get sick, or even like my wife's case, she has a gluten allergy. If they cross contaminate something, then she could be sick because of that. But like, they have to sometimes disclose that, and sometimes they may not. But it it's kind of funny that you said it's almost like a shifting dynamic, because it kind of is in a way.
Yeah, it is. I mean, in fact, the standard, like the duty, I mean, this is going back to just a simple negligence case, like from law school, but the they call it the reasonably prudent person standard. It's because we can't sit here and dictate, and we don't want to stand here and dictate what how people should behave in every act that they do, because you
Mhm.
and I are negligent every single day, whether we
Absolutely.
are driving too fast, or we look at our phone when we shouldn't be, or we don't hold the door open for somebody when we should, or I don't know, you take someone into your home and there's a defect with your house or something like that.
Mm.
um, that's a little more complicated, but you get the idea. When when we're judging people's behavior for the purposes of lawsuits, we try to impose a duty on people to act reasonably under the circumstances. And we
Right.
can't sit there and write a list as to what's proper. That always falls on the jury.
Mhm.
Was this person acting reasonably in that position at a given time, and that's the most just way to do it.
Yeah, I gotcha. So I guess one thing that I wanted to pivot over to is the relevance of Oppenheimer and kind of what your documentary talks about in today, because the one thing that I think you touched on a little bit at the very, very end of the documentary was how close we are to nuclear war today. And that's not to say that, the nukes are going to start flying tomorrow, but as you and I have talked about extensively on both our shows and together, the likelihood of World War III is there, and it is with Russia and China, and to a lesser degree Iran. Um, was that a big inspiration for you when kind of making this? And thoughts on that?
Yeah, primarily when I started making the documentary, I was trying to hit at that informed consent angle, to say that, well, the government right now is telling us that we all need to take this experimental medical treatment, and we should just all trust the science and trust the experts they put in front of us, because the experts would never lie or do anything nefarious to us.
Yeah.
Um, and that was my whole point. Now, by the time I actually got done with it, that whole moment had passed, trying to make that point, because now, like, well, it's still an issue. It's not in the popular mind right now.
Right.
And I was lucky because this Oppenheimer movie was coming out, and I hit up Mises Pieces and I said, "Hey, you know that script that I said I wanted to finish 6 months ago? Well, I'm gonna finish it now, and maybe we can get this thing out in time for the movie to drop." That's what happened, and yeah, it was just in the popular moment right now. I think what I want people to know is that having nuclear weapons around is, sure, you can say all day long it's about protecting us and about being safe and preventing deaths, and that we haven't had another world war since the nuclear threat has existed. But at the very start of this, the Manhattan Project didn't care about human lives, about American lives per se,
Right.
because if they did, they wouldn't have used us as guinea pigs, and they wouldn't have, I think, dangerously and with wanton disregard for human life, irradiated an entire state, and indeed put the entire human race at risk. Because there's that part in the film that says, well, there's a small chance that we might ignite the atmosphere on fire and destroy all human life as we know it, but it's a small chance. Punk, they press the button anyways.
Mhm.
So I just think that, you know, who gives them the right to play with humanity like that? And
Right.
they shouldn't have. So, in one of the most chilling things about the plutonium injection experiments is that in the record, in their memos, they called the subjects HP number 1 or number 2 or number 3. And HP stands for human product.
Mhm.
And so at the end of the day, it's important to know that, at least to the people who are making these weapons, Americans are not something to be cherished and protected. They are, at the end of the day, human product.
Yeah, that's insane. And to bring it back to Unit 731 again, it's funny that with these kind of projects where they do horrendous things to other people, um, they considered, I think the word in Japanese was maruta, which stood for logs, and that's what they considered all the all the people that they were experimenting with. And then obviously in Nazi Germany, they had considered all of the Jews and the people they were imprisoning, they considered them rats as well. So it's just interesting to kind of see how like these experiments, they all almost fit a script, if you follow what I'm saying. Like dehumanize people, have a group of people that are doing something to another group of people that are dehumanized, and see the results from there, and kind of carry on. It's just really interesting that you see across all cultures across the world, they follow a similar pattern.
Yeah, and I I think that's human psychology. I mean, how
Mhm.
do you get people to you mentioned Why Can't Johnny Kill, which was maybe, I think, the last documentary piece that I did before this, talking about how the US military realized that in any given engagement with the enemy, that only 20% of the soldiers were actually firing their weapons in combat.
Mhm.
And of course, that freaked the military out, and they decided to embark upon this campaign to condition the soldiers to pull the trigger. And they used psychology to do that. So they conditioned them to perform under that environment in a variety of ways by doing reflexive fire training, which was basically training the mind that when a target presents itself, you pull the trigger. And they did like Pavlovian or Skinnerian operant conditioning to make sure that that happens. But there's also the dehumanization that occurs in boot camp. I mean, I've had Marines on this show to tell me that even though the Marine Corps says, well, we shouldn't sing chants about, you know, napalm sticking to kids and bayoneting babies, that stuff still happens, you know, at Paris Island, and I think it's San Diego's the other Marine Corps base, so a training facility. So it's that dehumanization part is so important, that, and the proof is in the pudding that the US military does that, and that's how they get soldiers to perform. And it's just universal, and they do that for a reason. And I think the reason is that human beings naturally don't want to kill each other. I don't know if that's an evolutionary thing or if it's some kind of spiritual thing, but you would think that from a Darwinist point of view, preserving the human species would be important, because in the natural world, you have, when two bucks in the woods over here, when they are fighting each other, there comes to be a point where one buck is defeated and yields, and instead of goring the other deer, the winner will just leave him alone because
Right.
he's defeated. Well, why is that? Well, we don't want to, eliminate our own species because we need them. Predators will do that, or disease will do that. They can go on and they can mate with another deer. That's fine. But I'm going to preserve, secure my does. I don't care where he goes. He's defeated, but I'm going to have my harem and my does.
Right. Yeah, that's another interesting thing is that I think it's wolves when they fight, eventually the one will roll over and show his neck
Yeah.
to the other one, and typically they let the other one go because that's, like you said, that's yielding. Um it's interesting to think because like the natural course for humanity for centuries has been war and killing, but though when you get down to like an individual level, people don't want to do that. Like that's not, I don't think it's in our nature. I think what happens is that is people tend to get into groups, and then a group meets another group, then as we've kind of been talking about, dehumanization happens. You identify them as the out group, and then since you're a part of your own in group, now you don't have to take responsibility for your own individual actions. Therefore, nobody's responsible in this group because you're part of a collective now in this given situation. Therefore, it's all right to kill or do whatever you can against the out group. But once again, when it's just you and me, when it's just even if like we were talking to somebody that's completely politically different than us, we would never feel the way that some people do feel about people who disagree with them politically. We would just carry on normal conversation. But though you get two giant crowds together of people who are completely on different sides of an issue, then that's kind of where shit hits the fan.
Are you sure you didn't watch Why Can't Johnny Kill?
I don't think I did.
Okay. This is so Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman might be familiar to you. I don't know if I've talked about this on your show before. I feel like I have. But he started this an advisement group, consulting group. He was an Army Ranger, right? He started a consulting group called Killology, and all these military groups, military contractors, and law enforcement agencies would hire him to come give a speech about killing and performing under combat situations to all these police departments. So he wrote this book called Killology, or no, I forgot what it's called. but he wrote several books about it. The main one is what I'm referring to. And in it, he came up with it because he's also a psychologist or something like that. Came up with this thesis that I've been articulating, basically that it's either when you're fighting your own kind, it's either fight or flight or submission or posturing. So he adds a couple things like that. And posturing would be like firing at the enemy but not killing the enemy and doing things like that. And he says that the ways that militaries over the years have enabled the ability of soldiers to kill the enemy is to put them in situations where there's a diffusion of responsibility. One way of doing that would be the crowd mentality, but it's also a team operated weapon. And hold on, I'm getting kind of like an interference.
That's all right. You good?
I don't know if maybe it's on my end. So essentially you have team operated weapons like cannons and Gatling guns or, machine guns. But back in ancient times, it was things like the phalanx. It was a formation where everyone, like, I don't know if you've ever seen 300, the new one, where they would get together and they push with their shields all at the same time and then stab.
Oh, yeah.
It was things like that, being tightly in a group. But it was also the Milgram experiment, having your sergeant standing right next to you, watching you to make sure that you shoot that rifle. It's like in Band of Brothers, there's that scene where they're in Normandy and Blythe is the private who has hysterical blindness. But they get into a battle after Carentan where he won't fire his weapon and he won't fire his weapon. And Sergeant Winters has to stand over him and tell him, Blythe, you shoot that rifle, pour it on him, do it now. And then he does. So those are all things psychologically that can be used to force men to do these things.
Yeah, I don't think we have talked about that, so I'm gonna have to watch that, and we'll have to kind of do another round on that, because that's always been fascinating to me. Kind of like we've laid out all throughout the show, just the psychology of what makes people do horrible things, because I think like I don't want to say blue pilled, but kind of like the initial thought for most people is that, oh, these are just bad people who have bad intentions. But I feel like it's nowhere near that black or white. It is people who were just taught to do these things, or people in situations where they feel like they have no better option. Or like you said, the group mentality where you're a member of your own group, therefore everything that your group does is moral, everything that the out group does is immoral.
And of course, there is a subset of the human population, maybe 3%, that are legitimate psychopaths.
Absolutely.
And having those people in our population is necessary too, because you need those people to do things like, take risks and to protect and be violent, and to essentially be the spearhead of a lot of innovation and, business acumen and success and things like that too. So even there, it is nuance. But the question with that is, okay, well, what types of positions and situations naturally attract those psychopathic people? And I would posit that power and power politics is a magnet for those types of people. So they're disproportionately represented. And there's a lot of people who have done a lot of work on this. One of the founding books was Political Ponerology. It's this is kind of conspiracy, like deep conspiracy circles, Kyle.
Yeah.
Political Ponerology. Ponerology is a created word that means the study of evil. So it was a clinical psychological study of evil and psychopathy in politics. So I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I haven't heard of that, and that's kind of surprising. It's kind of like bodybuilders in a respect, and how this is relevant is that like people who are good at lifting, they see a reward from that disproportionately compared to other people. So obviously you want to keep going back for that reward. If you're good at something, you're going to keep doing that, and eventually you're going to gross out in just that one thing if you're good at it. Now, if you're not and you're not getting big returns, then the brain's not going to be that satisfied with not seeing a lot of progress when you're doing a lot of work. for very, very little return.
I just sent you a link to the book. I don't know if you can put it on screen so people can see it's a real thing. Michael Rechtenwald, who people might recognize from the Tom Woods show. I don't know if he's done some work for Mises too, if he was a freelancer or something like that. You've heard of Michael Rechtenwald, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. Really interesting book. And I know that James Corbett has talked about psychopathy and positions of power before. So I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. And it's interesting because, like, in our political sphere, I know you and I kind of poke fun at the people who always say, "Oh, they want you dead," but like, it's not that simple. And I understand why people may say that about communists, but like, there's no real communists in power anymore. Like, this is not the overwhelming, domineering ideology. Like, it's more of one that's like utilitarian, as in whatever is going to maintain the party in power's power, they're going to go for that. So like, if I honestly believe that if all the mainstream news, legacy media as it is, believed that let's say Catholicism was like the best way to maintain power and get donations and influence, they would pivot to that in a heartbeat, shamelessly. It's not about just their specific ideology. It's about whatever maintains their power and dominance over people. And I think people who, when they just say, "Oh, it's the left, it's the left, it's the left," I feel like you're being myopic and you're missing the whole picture when you say it's just one side. It's the side that's in power, and they'll do whatever they can to maintain that power.
Yeah, and have you? I mean, that sounds a lot like Justin Ray. Bringing it full circle here, it sounds a lot like Justin Raimondo had an article about what is the libertarian ethos on foreign policy. Like, what is our? You know, some people are realists, some people are neoconservatives. Like, what are we? Because we're not realists.
Right.
And in his theory was kind of taking it apart and seeing that like these nations and these events that happen in the world are not, they're not just, well, Russia is doing this to Ukraine. There's actual people involved, and what are these people's motivations? And largely it is the pursuit of power for their own ends. So any study of foreign policy is going to have to confront that, and confront the reality of who these people are, what their incentives are, and what dynamics do they have, and what are their motivations.
Yeah, so you know what? Kind of continue on that. I don't think we've ever really talked about this, but was Justin Raimondo like a big inspiration for you? I have to imagine, being that you're the fellow there, but you know, what was kind of his impact on you? And I really don't even think we talked about your kind of journey to libertarianism ever before, because I think the first time I had you on was with Kyle and Connor, and I can't believe in February it's gonna be 2 years ago that we did that show together. I was thinking about that all day today. I'm like, man, that's fucking insane.
That is crazy, man. Yeah. I mean, the years just seem to fly by faster and faster. I think that's part of growing up and getting older. So Justin, when Justin was alive, I didn't really follow his work all that closely. Although, I mean, for people who don't know, Justin was one of the two co-founders of antiwar.com with his good friend Eric Garris, Eric is, you know, very involved in still an he's the boss at antiwar.com, but he's very involved on a day-to-day basis with a lot of people that we hang out with, Kyle. And he's their boss. So, but I've spoken with Eric a few times, spoken with him about Garrett, about Justin and his legacy and what Justin might think of me, adopting his name in a way of being, you know, having a fellowship named after him at the Libertarian Institute. And I mean, Justin, from what I know, I never knew him personally, but he could be abrasive. He was a bit, you know, stubborn and bullheaded. From what I mean, Scott Horton said he was kind of an asshole. And so, but I can understand that, you know. I mean, people who are very talented and are hyper intelligent tend to be very sure of themselves in a sense, but also can be abrasive and obsessed with being correct. And I'm the same way sometimes, I'm sure.
Yeah,
So
intelligent people are really, really good at buying their own bullshit because they know they're intelligent, so they'll build narratives to convince themselves they're correct.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm, we're all human. We all have our things and our faults. And I'm sure that if you asked Justin's partner, he would say that Justin was, a fine person and I loved him. And Eric loves him and loved him and was, they were very close friends and coworkers for a long time. So,
Yeah.
but his effect on the movement, and I think the joy that you see with when you watch Justin's speeches, the joy and passion for this, I think is apparent. And his writing is just, he was a prolific writer. He wrote constantly. He would publish a long full column three times a week. And all of it was, he just had this encyclopedic knowledge of an understanding of world events and world history and those types of things. So I think that the reason why I wanted to take his name was because he had passed away. And I think that it's incredibly important to preserve his legacy and his brand of libertarianism, but also his views on foreign policy. And I'm not a robot. I mean, I have my own ideas about things, certainly. But I think that brand, that passionate libertarian ethos, packaging it in antiwar.com and its mission. And the mission is to provide a right-wing anti-war take within the lineage of the old right through the Rothbardian tradition, but to present it in a way that A, makes it okay for right-wingers to be anti-war, but B, is in a coalition building way where we can be leaders in an anti-war movement, building these bridges, but also being some of the best goddamn reporters and op-ed writers out there and leading by providing that coverage. And I think that that's worthy of emulation and worthy of trying to carry on that legacy. So in terms of my own history and how I've come to the movement, my parents were Bush conservatives growing up. They were political, not overly political though. Hardworking people who had built themselves up from families that were working class or maybe a little worse. So they always instilled in me a hard work ethic and success and entrepreneurship, which I'm my own boss with my own companies, I guess, in my own endeavors. But growing up I always fashioned myself as being someone who cared deeply about the Constitution. And I remember when I was in high school, my mom was a lawyer, and I asked her, how can the Fourth Amendment says no search, no unreasonable searches and seizures unless upon probable cause. Well, then how can we have OWI checkpoints? Because you're just stopping people for no reason. And she said, well, what they do is it's a balancing test. There's certain things that the government can do when they have X, Y, and Z. And I thought that was fucking bullshit. And that pissed me off. And I think it was that point of being pissed off about things that is really the rocket fuel that you need to propel yourself to, you can tell that Scott Horton gets pissed off about shit. He's found a good balance, I hope, in his life of being fired up and pissed off about stuff and using it as fuel to further his activism and his career. But when I was an undergrad, I was in Young Americans for Liberty. And I came in like in the crater of the Ron Paul 2012 campaign, when it went from hundreds of members at the University of Minnesota to about 7 people. And that's when I came in.
Right.
And so I did a bit of that. I had a Reason magazine sticker on my laptop, and my roommate, who was actually experienced in like the libertarian scene, he was like, why do you have a Reason magazine sticker on your laptop? And I was like, oh, I'm a libertarian, man. And he's like, well, they're fucking gay. But he was a lot nicer than to me about. He was actually the first host of Liberty Weekly. If you go back in the first like 20 episodes, he was the host. And but he introduced me to Stefan Molyneux, and I was a Ron Paul guy.
Yeah.
But Jerry, his name was, he kept asking questions, and they were questions that I couldn't answer. Like,
Yeah.
you know, if it's not okay for me to do something to you, why is it okay if I get together in a group of people called government and do it? And I couldn't answer those questions, and it led me down. Answering those questions led me down it planted a splinter in my mind that took months to work out. And when I did, bam! I mean, when I read Anatomy of the State for the first time, it like crushed my head into tiny pieces, and it just floored me. It was a life-changing experience, and sounds weird to talk about because now, having been in this scene a few years, I mean, when I say things like that, it sounds cringe to me. But that's what happened.
Right. Wow. Yeah, it's kind of weird. I can't believe in, almost 2 years we never really covered that. Yeah, man. Jeez. Yeah, my brother kind of introduced me to Stefan Molyneux, and I remember my brother always he said he was a liberal, and then the one day he said he was a libertarian. And then I was kind of like confused by it. And then he started like passing off Milo Yiannopoulos, and then Stefan Molyneux, Larry Sharp, Eric July. And then that was kind of when the gears started turning for me. And I remember I would have a long drive out to school. It was like 2.5 hours, and I would listen to Stefan Molyneux quite a bit back then. And that's kind of what really got me into libertarianism. It was mainly through like his peaceful parenting stuff, and also like his long philosophy calls, which I just found absolutely fascinating. So it's kind of like, and I think Justin Raimondo, from my reading of it and from what I've heard of other people, it seems like Trump kind of damaged them in a way. Like,
Yeah,
people really latched on to Trump when there was like, in 2016, 2015, I understand because he's the new guy on the block. You don't know, and he's saying a lot of the right stuff. Fair enough. But though, like 2018, 2019, by then the mask was off at that point. You should have known who he was. So I don't know. When I heard Stefan Molyneux, even like after 2020, saying that Trump's an anti-war candidate, and people still saying stuff like that, I'm like, oh, come on, man. Now, you're just trying to, you're, I don't want to say you're grifting, but you're kind of grifting.
Yeah, and I think that if I could read a bit more of Justin's work at the time. I remember I wrote a piece about Justin when Trump pulled out of the Iran deal. And I wrote a piece about it back in 2016. And I think I cited Justin about something because I know that Justin was, he was pro-Trump kind of at the beginning and was hopeful and optimistic about Trump. And people knocked him for it. I believe that people took it poorly. I could be wrong, but
there's one person in particular that I'm thinking of, and I think you know who I'm thinking of.
Yeah, maybe. But I think that I don't know exactly when he got his cancer diagnosis, and maybe there's this thing that people do, and maybe I'm off base with this, but I think there might be this thing that people do when they get towards the end of their lives, is that they have to have hope that something is going to change in their lifetime.
Gotcha.
I mean, if I was contemplating the end of my life, I would want some fruit, to see some kind of fruit of whatever this experiment is and whatever it is that our effort is. I mean, remember that Justin was a libertarian activist since, when he was a teenager, he met Ayn Rand, and Ayn Rand was impressed with him. Like, so you're talking about a lifetime of activism, lots of it. And long hours late at night, working your fingers to the bone type of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. That strikes a more personal note than, that I think people might realize for me personally. But yeah, it is kind of crazy to think that somebody like that could have lived their whole life and then not seen really the fruits of their labor. And like, not to say that he didn't do anything, but like, you put all this effort forth, and what ultimately happened, like, you grew a larger liberty movement, which I'm sure he did. And I know it sounds like I'm dunking on him, but like, you know, I guess I'm almost questioning our purpose in the liberty movement. It's like, you know, what's it going to look like? I don't know, man, but you know, I'm passionate about these topics, and I'm passionate about the way that I feel about them. And I think we have the right ideology, but you know, I also question the effectiveness of it. And it's not something that would ever, I think, shake me from my positions, but I just always kind of ask those questions. I know probably you and everybody else in the liberty movement, especially after 2020, probably asked themselves the same question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I've expressed some of that to you in DMs, you know,
Yeah.
just the frustration with, I mean, because at the end of the day, it's been 7 years of my life putting, you know, hundreds and hundreds of hours into this project, and what's it all worth, and why are you doing it, and that kind of thing. But I took a hiatus, and I just ended up right back here. So there's something about it that I get. You got to figure out what makes you happy, and I think that if you can't qualify your happiness on getting some kind of actual change in the world. I think that, you know, your real happiness and success should be based on not looking at what you haven't done, but looking at what you have done. And if I'm looking at what I have done, I mean, it's hundreds of episodes, thousands of hours of, I don't know, maybe hundreds of hours of documenting podcasts and meeting wonderful people and actually going places and having hundreds of thousands of people listen to what I say. And maybe I changed, you know, a few thousands of their minds, you know, that would be cool. But at the end of the day, too, you know, I have a successful law practice. I have a wife and 3 beautiful kids, and, you know, a beautiful wife as well. I didn't mean to exclude her with that statement, but you know, you have all those things and a wonderful family, and that's what should be leading it. And if you find fulfillment in doing these things, I mean, it's good to move the needle, but you can't. It's not based on that per se.
Yeah, you know what? I couldn't agree more. And I think about that all the time, especially when people like bust my balls about anything. You know, I've only been doing this now for, in October, it'll be 2 years that I've been podcasting. And, you know, 228 episodes now. I've had many, many DMs and messages from people telling me, like, hey, they asked me a question, and then a couple weeks later they come back and say, oh my God, thank you so much. You've changed my health. Adam, you know, I've quote tweeted him where he's told me, hey man, I've lost like 50 pounds from your advice. And it's just, yeah, shit like that. Like, I can't even fathom it. It's so awesome to see other people do well, especially people that I like. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we're probably at a good place to cut it off here. But like, in that same vein, seeing you do well with your documentary, I know you were feeling a little bit of a lull there probably about 6 months ago or so. I noticed you're putting out more content again, and that makes me really happy because I feel like you do good work, and this is definitely a moment for you that you should celebrate, and that I'm very, very happy for you. And I think a lot of the other people are too. And I think it's something that you really deserved.
Well, thank you, Kyle. I really appreciate that, and I cannot tell you how gratifying it is to see those numbers come in and for people to be excited about this. And in a way, I'm like, well, this was always there. You know, all this stuff was always there. The content was always there. It's just, I guess, it's trying and changing and trying and retrying and trial and error until you find the combination that works, I guess. And this combination worked this time. Now, maybe if I make another documentary about a different topic, it might not hit the same, even if it's just as well produced. So I guess you enjoy your time in the sunshine, and if you can find a way to bring the sunshine come in again, do it. But at this point in time, you know, it's a modest success. I mean, it's got 10,000 downloads or views, which is, you know, some people get 10 times that much in a single episode, but for me, you know, it's about 5 times as much as what I usually get. So maybe a bit more than 5. So it's nice, and I'm trying to capitalize on the moment because I've gotten hundreds of new email list subscribers, and so I'm trying to get that and keep it up with it, and maybe I can turn it into like a passive kind of income thing. Maybe not quite passive, but just to capture that, capture that energy and do more.
Yeah, dude. Well, like I said, I hope you keep putting stuff out. I want to read Conrail's chat. Never be afraid to ask questions, but never give in to the temptation to believe it's all for nothing. Just meet the person or people where you can and hope to change one soul at a time. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And like I said earlier, whenever I get messages from people looking at me for advice or asking questions, I try not to give prescriptions in like this kind of context. But if it's a one-on-one thing, then I feel a little bit more comfortable doing that. But just to get those messages is just really, really cool. And then, obviously for you getting that many new email subscribers, then that many views on the documentary, and then kind of doing the little media tour that you've done. I mean, that's just awesome. And like I said, I couldn't be happier for you. And hopefully when number 2 comes out, it's the same deal all over again. We're going to see Pat, you back on the Corvette Report, and hopefully bigger shows than that as well.
Yeah, I hope so. And I just gotta put my nose to the grindstone and put out another piece and see how it goes. But I think to that end, having a product that is special, that gets people excited, I think it gives me a reason to reach out to bigger platforms and sell it. And I think that I've learned from you that I shouldn't be afraid to go to those people saying, look at this cool thing I have.
Yeah, dude, absolutely. Well, I know I've pitched a ton of ideas to you, but hopefully, you have ideas of your own that you kind of throw out there into the ether, and then they, turn into more projects like that. Because I totally think documentaries are your thing, but your podcast is awesome as well, and I've really enjoyed your podcast in particular. So hopefully, you can get on lots of cool guests with this, and this is kind of like a billboard, if you will, to kind of draw people in your direction. So. Yeah, man, if you got any plugs, if you don't got anything else, let's cap it there.
Yeah, so watch the documentary vitaldescent.com/Oppenheimer. We'll get you right to that documentary. You'll get a pop-up to sign up for my email list, which is like the main vehicle of my support. So if you get the pop-up, put in your email list. My membership website is called libertyweekly.club. I haven't changed the URL yet, but that's the URL. Instead of .com, it's .club, CLUB. So sign up there. I've been sending out email content every single day, and there's a premium level, $5 a month or $55 a year, and you get early access, bonus episodes, and members only posts as well. So thanks for having me on, Kyle. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Well, as always, it was a good chat, and I'm looking forward to doing the next one. And then we'll be in touch, man. I don't even know what the hell I'm going on. But,
No worries.
Thank you everybody for listening and checking it out. Make sure you like the video, subscribe, do what you're gonna do, and make sure you go check out Pat's documentary because it is fan-freaking-tastic. And check out all his past ones. I think we're gonna be listening to Why Can't Johnny Kill tomorrow, and I'm gonna have to revisit the Stand of the Century one just to kind of keep that a little bit fresh in my mind.
Oh yeah.
Thanks, Pat.